Welcome back to MiniTip Monday. My name's Lil Pavey, and this week we're talking about the advanced tips for standing position. Advanced standing position isn't one position. Essentially, it's a series of movements that are designed to let you stay balanced while you're riding. When you want to learn to get better at standing up, you have to make sure that the basics are really dialed in. If you're off balance on a simple, easy piece of terrain, or you're still thinking about how to be balanced, it makes learning that next step pretty difficult. Ultimately, when we're learning to ride off-road and ride in more difficult places, your balance being spot on is the most important thing. As you get better and your balance improves, you'll be able to go to harder places, and it's a bit of a perpetual cycle. It's what makes someone who's a really, really good technical rider, a Chris Birch, so good. The three movements of direction when you're talking about a more advanced standing position for riding are up and down, so vertical movement, forwards and backwards, and left and right. As the terrain gets more technical and you get better, those three combine into being one fluid motion. But at the start, you need to break them down into their core principles. Let's start with that vertical movement. Vertical movement is the kind of movement you have when you hit a bump really hard and you need to absorb that impact, or when you need to lower your center of gravity because suddenly the terrain got a little bit more complicated. The principle of it is actually pretty straightforward. When you hit that bump and your body needs to absorb it, you bend at the knees, your bum goes backwards. It's called a hinge movement. And when you hinge, you also want your back to become more parallel to the ground. That parallelness lowers your center of gravity, it helps you stay balanced, and it lets you take in a huge amount of force. If you're moving in the opposite way to this, so when you hit a bump, your knees move forwards from your ankles and your hips don't go backwards, it's not great. It's not going to work well for you, and it kind of looks a bit goofy. Forward and backward movement is the process of dealing with acceleration and deceleration, or deciding to weight individual wheels. This can be as simple as pulling away from a standing start, or needing to accelerate up something, or going down a hill, or something like going around corners and riding sand where you're determining where your weight balance is across the bike. Neither of these are fixed positions, but when it comes to finding that good position going forwards and going backwards, the principle's not that complicated. Firstly, when we lean into something, you want to deal with an acceleration. Your pivot comes from the ankles and the hips. So your ankles are going to let your whole body move forwards, and any extra movement you want to lower your center of gravity or to get further forward comes from the hips. The same happens in reverse when we go backwards. Your heels will drop down, your bum will go backwards. But one thing that's generally pretty consistent is that your shins stay 90 degrees to the foot peg. If your shins start coming a long way forwards when you accelerate, or they go forwards when you want to decelerate, your toes will drop, you'll go off balance. So think about it like that. It'll stop you overbalancing over the front while trying to deal with an acceleration without having to use strength or overloading the front wheel. I think this principle is a lot more important if you're a taller rider, because generally your center of gravity is higher, and as you start to move forwards, if you're upright, it becomes really easy to overbalance the bike, to push wheels accidentally and lose your balance. This same principle is kind of why bar risers aren't always great for the handling of a bike. If you make your own center of gravity too high by getting everything more upright, it becomes really easy to mess up your own balance. Sideways movement is the movement of keeping balance. Think of a bike going around a corner and falling over. To stop that happening, we need to start to move our own body. When we move our body, we control the bike and the weight through the foot pegs. When it comes to enacting this in the real world, the principles are the same. Sideways movement comes from the hips. We can move our hips left and right, and in a straight-legged, relaxed position, we've got a pretty good range of motion there already. When you start to turn tighter or need to keep the balance because the bike's getting thrown around by the terrain, we can bend our legs and our bum goes backwards slightly. It lowers our center of gravity. But once we've bent our legs a little bit, we've got even more motion to work with. As before with the other two tips, the cues for doing this well and moving well are the same. You want your weight down through your heels, that flex in the ankles, and you want to bend your knees with your shins vertical to the foot pegs. Hips go backwards. It's the same movement pattern, but it lets you move from one side to the other in a really nice way. When it comes to enacting the principle of sideways movement in real life, it's a little bit more fluid than just an individual thing. When we're cornering, it blends that forward movement with a little bit of horizontal movement and a little bit of sideways movement. And as you expand your riding technique, that moves as well. Bike's moving slower and you're trying to keep balance, you might have to go forwards a bit or backwards a bit at the same time as going sideways. With all of this though, the basic patterns, no matter how complicated your riding gets, always remain the same. And there you have it. I think the basic principles of advanced standing position are actually pretty simple to understand, but they're a little bit more difficult to enact. You're going to find yourself squatting when you shouldn't and not squatting when you should. You're going to find yourself a little bit off balance and losing your personal balance a bit more often while you're learning, but it'll come with time. One thing that I think is a really golden rule for riding position is that if it feels hard work to maintain a position, or you're finding yourself with sore hands and holding on really tight, something's probably not quite right. You need to go back to basics and give it a bit more time. The same as I said last time in one of these videos, a little bit of recording of what you look like is going to help you a lot, especially as your smartphone's got a little bit of slow-mo in there. It's going to make a huge difference. I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you have, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and come back and watch some more. We'll have more mini tips coming soon, and we show these videos much earlier on our Patreon than we do anywhere else, so go and check that out. Lastly, thanks for watching, and remember, life's better when you're riding.